Welcome. This is Michael Raffini from the TeacherCast Academy, and today we're going to learn about the D-Day invasion. The Battle of Normandy, known as D-Day, still remains the largest seaborne invasion in history. D-Day was fought during World War II on June 6, 1944, between the Allied nations and German forces occupying Western Europe. Allied forces launched the invasion from across the English Channel over to the Normandy coast of France in the early morning hours of June 6th. The attack was to take place on June 5th. However, because of poor weather, the attack was delayed until June 6th. It is hard to conceive the epic scope of this decisive battle, which foreshadowed the end of Hitler's dream of Nazi domination and was the beginning of the end of World War II. The events that led to the D-Day invasion started on September 1st, 1939, when Germany attacked Poland, causing France, Great Britain, and Canada to declare war on Germany. The result was 6 years of World War II. By the spring of 1940, the German army was ready to invade France, defended by not only the French military, but also a sizable British force. Within 6 weeks, however, the Germans defeated the Allies and seized control of France. By 1944, the Germans knew that the Allies, also now including the United States, among others, would attempt an invasion of France to liberate Europe from Germany. By early 1944, the Allies, under the leadership of U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, had been planning an invasion of France for more than a year. As the Allied invasion plan became more specific, it was dubbed Operation Overlord, and preparations and training for the mission began in earnest. The German military from 1942 anticipated an invasion, so they began building what was known as the Atlantic Wall, which was a series of heavily armed fortifications all along the French coast. The Allied battle plan was to commence in 2 phases, an airborne attack and an amphibious attack. Prior to the actual amphibious invasion, Allied planes pounded the Nazi defenders and dropped thousands of paratroopers behind German lines the night before the seaborne landings. However, due to the night attack, many drop zones were missed, soldiers were scattered, and equipment was lost. On the evening of June 5, 1944, more than 160,000 men, a fleet of 5,000 ships and landing craft, 50,000 vehicles, and 11,000 planes sat in southern England, poised to attack secretly across the English Channel along the Normandy coast of France. In the early morning of June 6, 1944, the operation began. The Allies landed at 5 beaches in the Normandy area with the code names of Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, Gold Beach, Juno Beach, and Sword Beach. Each Allied amphibious boat carried approximately 150 soldiers to the Normandy beaches. When the boat ramps dropped, soldiers had to jump, swim, run, and crawl to the cliffs. Many of the first young men, most not yet 20 years old, entered the surf carrying 80 pounds of equipment. They faced over 200 yards of beach under heavy German machine gun and artillery fire before reaching any landscape protection. By nightfall on June 6, the Allied forces had suffered nearly 10,000 casualties. More than 4,000 were dead. However, more than 100,000 had made it ashore and secured French coastal villages. By June 11th, more than 326,000 troops, 55,000 vehicles, and 105,000 tons of supplies had been landed on the beaches. By June 30th, the Allies had established a firm foothold in Normandy. Due to the valor, fidelity, and sacrifice of the Allied forces, Fortress Europe had been breached. Now, let's take a look at a brief History Channel video on the D-Day invasion.
Well, D-Day was obviously the most important single fight of that war. And of course, had we lost it, there's no telling what the outcome would have been.
Since the American entry into the war, American generals had been agitating for an opportunity to fight the Germans directly. The D-Day invasion of Normandy in June 1944, represented the cutting edge of this offensive.
Essential condition that underwrote the success of D-Day was the fact that Germany had been bled virtually to death by fighting on the Eastern Front for several years against the Red Army in the Soviet Union before D-Day ever happened.
The Germans had been preparing for this invasion as long as the Americans and the British had been, and they had been digging in. And they knew that they could inflict appalling casualties on the first units ashore. Well, somebody had to do it. And so the soldiers went, and indeed, those first units did suffer very high rates of death and wounding.
There's one thing to go on a beach with sand dunes. It's something else when you've got enemy on top of these bluffs. And for some reason, our naval gunnery was either off or something went wrong there. They couldn't destroy those gun emplacements.
But eventually, the weight of the invasion took hold. The numbers of Americans, the numbers of craft, allowed the Americans and the British to establish a beachhead. And once they established a beachhead, then they could bring more and more soldiers and equipment ashore.
One thing I don't think either the Japanese or the Germans really counted on was what it meant to come up against a massive capitalist industrial power. The ability to build stuff on a massive scale with massive numbers was just something they hadn't really anticipated.
If you look back at the old photographs and the footage of that armada out there off the coast, I don't think they've ever assembled before or after anything like that.
Eventually, it was the technology, it was the weight of American weapons that tipped the balance. But at the very beginning, it was the soldiers, the ones who splashed ashore, the ones who knew that in the first wave, lots and lots of them would never come back. And those are the ones who made possible everything that followed.
The Rangers who went in first and the waves that came after them stood right up to it. And there was more bravery that day than one can hardly imagine.